She called the cops on me for parking on my own driveway. It was 6:47 a.m. when I looked out the kitchen window and saw two patrol cars parked behind my mud-covered F-250. Their red and blue lights flickered across the frosted windshield of my wife's Subaru, painting the pine trees outside with nervous color. At first, I thought something terrible had happened, maybe a break-in, maybe a loose animal on the property. But the moment I stepped out the front door, the truth hit me like the morning air, cold, absurd, and completely unnecessary. Standing on the gravel shoulder across the road was Connie Dalton, clipboard in hand, lips pressed together like she was about to hand out a citation herself. She didn't live next door, in fact. Her property line started 3 houses down, but somehow she'd made my driveway her morning battlefield. "Sir," one of the officers began, keeping his tone polite, "we received a complaint about a large vehicle obstructing a residential right-of-way." I blinked. "You mean my driveway?" He hesitated. The younger one glanced at his partner, then back at Connie, who was already crossing her arms, ready to pounce. "That's the truck," she said, her voice sharp and confident. "It's been there for days. It's against HOA policy. Commercial vehicles aren't permitted overnight." I could have laughed if I weren't so irritated. "You mean the HOA that I'm not even part of?" Her smirk widened. "Everyone in Pinewood Estates is part of it. Read your covenants." Here's the thing, I had read them. Before I bought this property, I made sure it sat outside the HOA boundaries. It was one of the main reasons we chose this place. No dues, no committees, no surprise rules about what color your fence can be. Freedom, or so I thought. I opened my wallet, not to argue, but to pull out my Army ID. "Ma'am," I said evenly, "I spent 23 years following real rules, so I double-checked the legal ones before I bought this land." The officers both shifted awkwardly. The older one gave Connie a look that said, "We shouldn't be here." She wasn't done. "You can't just park an eyesore like that. It brings down property values. And the bylaws don't apply here," I finished. "This address isn't on your plat map." One of the officers cleared his throat and asked if there was a way to resolve this peacefully. I told him there already was by leaving. They did, eventually. But not before Connie snapped a few photos of my license plate and muttered something about reporting this to the board. When they were gone, I stood there for a while, the cold seeping through my socks, staring at the tire tracks their cruisers had left in the gravel. My dog, Max, barked once from inside, sensing my mood. That's how the whole thing started, with a morning I'll never forget, a driveway that apparently offended the neighborhood queen, and a realization that freedom in this town came with conditions I never signed for. I went back inside, poured another cup of coffee, and told my wife Marina that we were officially on someone's list. She just sighed the kind of sigh you let out when you've already guessed this day was coming. "Don't start anything," she said. "Just let it go." But that's not who I am. When someone challenges me over something I know is right, my instinct isn't to fight, it's to verify. To look for the truth in black and white, on paper, where no one's emotions can twist it. That morning, I didn't know I was about to uncover a web of control, debt, and lies stretching deeper than any HOA manual ever printed. All I knew was a woman named Connie thought she ran this neighborhood and that I'd just become her next project. When we first moved to Pinewood Estates, I thought I'd found peace. After 30 years of service, half in the Army Corps of Engineers, half as a city inspector, all I wanted was quiet. A piece of land big enough for a workshop, a lake nearby where I could fish, and neighbors who minded their own business. The cabin we found checked every box. It wasn't much at first: cedar siding, faded to gray, roof shingles curling at the edges, a driveway more pothole than gravel. But it sat right outside the HOA boundary line. No monthly dues. No architectural committee breathing down your neck about mailbox height or lawn color. I still remember the first morning we woke up there. Sunlight poured through the window over the sink, catching the dust in the air like glitter. Marina was humming some old country song as she unpacked dishes. For the first time in years, we weren't surrounded by rules, schedules, or supervisors. It was supposed to be our place, a quiet retirement retreat. I spent the first month rebuilding the porch and fixing the plumbing. Every evening, I'd sit on the steps with a cold beer and watch the light fade across the trees. No sirens, no meetings, just peace. Then came the friendly visits. At first, I thought they were neighbors being neighborly people introducing themselves. But something about the way they talked made me uneasy. "Welcome to the community," one woman had said, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll want to attend the next HOA meeting so you can get caught up on the landscaping ordinances." I told her politely that our property wasn't under the HOA. She laughed like I was joking. "Oh, everyone around here contributes. That's how we keep Pinewood beautiful." Then came the newsletter's printed sheets left in the mailbox with no return address. Community reminders, they said, about trash schedules, fence heights, and acceptable exterior colors. I tossed them out at first. But when one showed up with my name handwritten on the top, "Please comply before fines begin," I realized someone was keeping closer tabs than they should. That was the first time I heard the name Connie Dalton. She was the HOA president unofficially elected, from what I gathered, and she ran Pinewood Estates like a small kingdom. Every email, every notice, every suggestion that crossed my path eventually traced back to her. Marina told me to ignore it. "She just likes control," she said. "Let her have her little club." So I did, for a while. I stayed quiet, kept working on the cabin, and minded my own business. But it didn't matter. The more I ignored them, the more they pushed. First, it was the mailbox. Too rural. Then the fence. Too tall. Then the truck. Too industrial. It was always something. Always a new way to remind me I didn't fit their mold. I tried talking to a few of the neighbors' good folks, most of them, and they'd just lower their voices, glance around, and say things like, "Yeah, Connie's intense." Best to stay on her good side. But that wasn't an option anymore. Because once someone like her decides you're a problem, you've only got two choices: play along or stand your ground. And me? I've never been good at bowing down. The first letter came folded neatly in a white envelope, tucked under my doormat like some kind of ransom note. No stamp, no sender, just bold letters across the top: NOTICEOFV, IOLAT, ION. According to Pinewood Estates, Homeowners Association, I was being fined $150 for constructing a non-compliant barrier along the east property line. I stood there on my porch, holding the paper, half laughing, half stunned. Non-compliant barrier? It was a wooden fence, the same one that had been standing there long before I bought the property. All I did was replace 3 rotted posts and stain the boards to match the cabin. Marina thought it was some kind of mix-up. "Just call them," she said. "Explain you're not part of the HOA." So I did. I called the number at the bottom of the letter, which turned out to be a community voicemail box. 2 days later, I got a call back from none other than Connie Dalton herself. Her tone was as sharp as a lawyer's and as sweet as syrup. "Mr. Brady," she said, "I see you've made some structural changes. While we appreciate your initiative, your fence doesn't align with Pinewood's uniform standard. You'll need to submit a modification request and pay the fee." I tried to keep calm. "Mrs. Dalton, I've told you before, my address isn't under Pinewood jurisdiction. Check the county records. I'm outside the HOA line." There was a pause. The kind that told me she didn't like being corrected. Then, In that tight voice of hers, she said, "I think you'll find the boundaries have expanded since those records were printed." "Expanded?" I repeated. "By who?" "The board," she said, like that settled it. I told her politely that unless the county clerk's office told me otherwise, I wouldn't be paying a dime. Then I hung up. That should have been the end of it. But 3 days later, another envelope arrived. Then another. Each one with a new fine: $50 for improper landscaping, $75 for unregistered vehicle, $25 for failure to attend mandatory meeting. It was harassment, plain and simple. I went down to the county office myself, spoke to the assessor, pulled up the land plate. And just like I knew, my property sat 112 feet outside the HOA perimeter. Clear as day. When I showed the clerk the letters, she frowned. "They can't legally fine you," she said, "but some of these HOAs try anyway. They figure most people don't fight back." That night, Marina and I sat at the kitchen table going through the pile of letters. She looked tired, not angry, just weary. "Tom," she said softly, "I don't want to live like this. I just want peace." "I know," I said, "but you can't reason with bullies. You stop them." So I started documenting everything, every letter, every voicemail, every friendly reminder posted on our door. I even installed a small camera over the porch just in case. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, it caught something. A T9, 23p. Connie herself walked up our driveway with two men I didn't recognize. One carried a clipboard, the other a flashlight. They stopped at the fence, pointed, talked for a minute, then took pictures. They had no right to be there. That was the moment I decided this wasn't just about a fence anymore. It was about control. About a woman who thought she could rewrite property lines with intimidation and paperwork. I called a lawyer the next morning, a friend from my Army days who now specialized in property law. When I explained the situation, he chuckled low under his breath and said, "Sounds like you've got yourself a case of overreach. Keep every document. We'll handle this the right way." So I did. I waited quietly, methodically, while Connie kept tightening the noose, unaware that every step she took was being recorded, logged, and prepared for a formal complaint. But before any of that went to court, things got worse. Much worse. Because when people like Connie realize paperwork isn't enough to control you, they start trying to control your reputation. The first sign that Connie had changed tactics came at the grocery store. I was picking up a bag of mulch and a case of bottled water when I noticed two women from down the street whispering near the produce aisle. They saw me, froze mid-sentence, and suddenly busied themselves with the apples. It wasn't subtle, not even close. When I got to the checkout counter, the cashier, a kid named Ely, who usually chatted my ear off about fishing, barely looked up. Just scanned my things, handed me the receipt, and muttered, "Have a good one." Something had shifted. Later that afternoon, my neighbor Mark stopped by while walking his dog. He used to talk my ear off about his new truck, but this time he seemed uneasy. After some small talk, he finally said, "Hey man, just so you know, people are saying you're suing the HOA. Connie told folks you're trying to take the neighborhood to court." I nearly laughed out loud. "That's funny," I said, "because last I checked, they're the ones trying to fine me illegally." He looked uncomfortable. "Yeah, well, she's been warning people you might retaliate or something. Said you're the kind of guy who'd do something drastic." That was the moment I realized just how far she was willing to go. It wasn't about the fence anymore, or the truck, or the driveway. Connie was trying to poison the well, to make sure everyone saw me as the problem. Over the next few weeks, the pattern became obvious. Neighbors who used to wave now avoided eye contact. My mail started arriving, late or not at all. Even the landscaping company I'd hired stopped showing up, citing conflicts with HOA policy. It was psychological warfare, HOA style. Then came the community newsletter. Normally, I ignored it, but this time, a neighbor slipped it under my door with a sticky note that said, "You might want to see this." Right there on page 2, in the president's message section, was a paragraph about recent acts of noncompliance threatening the harmony and safety of Pinewood Estates. It didn't name me directly, but it didn't have to. Phrases like former city employee abusing legal loopholes in residence, urged to report suspicious behavior made it crystal clear who she meant. I felt the anger rise up, slow and hot. She was using fear to isolate me, to make me crack. But she didn't understand who she was dealing with. I'd spent decades dealing with bureaucracy, paperwork, and manipulative people in positions of authority. This wasn't new to me. What was new was the personal nature of it, the way she dragged my name through the mud in a place I'd chosen to retire. Marina tried to keep me calm. "She's baiting you," she said. "She wants you to react so she can use it against you." And she was right. But there's a difference between reacting and responding. That night, I sat at my desk, opened a new file on my computer, and began organizing everything. Dates, times, photos, voicemails, letters, everything Connie had done since the first violation notice. Then I wrote one more thing, a formal letter addressed to the Pinewood Estates Board of Directors. It wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was surgical. I laid out the facts, the legal property boundaries, the harassment, the false fines, and the libelous statements in the newsletter. I made it clear that if the harassment continued, I would file an injunction for defamation and harassment through the county court. And just to make sure it landed where it needed to, I CC'd my attorney and the county's code enforcement office. The next morning, I printed 5 copies and hand-delivered them, one to each board member's mailbox. It felt good. Controlled. Calculated. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was back in command. But I underestimated how deep Connie's influence ran. Because 2 days later, I woke up to find an official-looking notice nailed to my fence, stamped with a county seal I didn't recognize. In bold letters. It read, CEASEANDDSIST, unapproved construction and violation of Community Ordinance 148. At the bottom, in small print, was a signature. Filed by Connie Dalton, HOA President. Except there was one problem: it wasn't real. I stood there for a long time, staring at that notice nailed to my fence. It looked official, the county logo printed in faded blue ink, legal language about ordinances and citations, even a fake signature at the bottom. But something about it didn't sit right. The seal was slightly off-center, and the font wasn't one I'd ever seen used on legitimate county forms. Marina stepped out onto the porch, coffee mug in hand. "What now?" she asked tiredly. I handed her the paper. "You tell me." She scanned it, frowning. "This looks fake, exactly." That afternoon, I drove straight to the county administration office, notice in hand. The clerk behind the counter took one look at it and frowned. "This isn't one of ours," she said. "We don't even have an ordinance numbered 148. I asked if someone could have filed it under a special community code or neighborhood agreement. She shook her head. "No, sir. Only officially zoned HOAs have that kind of authority, and Pinewood's jurisdiction stops at Ridgeway Lane. You're on the outside of that boundary." "So this," I said, holding up the notice, "is a forgery?" She hesitated before answering. "Looks that way." That was it. The breaking point. Connie had stepped over the line from harassment into fraud, creating fake county documents to intimidate me. I thanked the clerk, took her business card, and left with a new kind of determination burning in my chest. When I got home, I scanned the notice and sent it to my lawyer, James Colton. He called me within the hour. "Tom," he said, "this is bad for her." That's document falsification, possibly impersonating a county officer. We can use this. He advised me to file a formal report with the sheriff's department. So that's exactly what I did. When the deputy arrived at my property, I handed him a folder, every letter, every photo, every forged notice, neatly labeled. He flipped through it, eyebrows raised higher with every page. "Mr. Brady," he said, "this is a lot of evidence. You've been patient, I'll give you that. I'll forward this to our investigator and see what comes of it." That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. I thought it was finally over, that the law would handle it. But if Connie was good at anything, it was doubling down. A few days later, the neighborhood's group email list, the one I'd never joined, suddenly lit up. Someone forwarded me the thread. It started with a long message from President Dalton, warning residents about a local man attempting to discredit the association and using legal intimidation to evade community responsibilities. Attached was a photo of me standing next to the fence with a forged notice in my hand. She twisted the whole thing, making it look like I'd been tampering with county property. My blood ran cold. She was playing dirty and publicly. Marina was furious. "That's slander, Tom. She's dragging your name through the mud again." "Not for long," I said quietly. I called James back, forwarded him the entire email chain. Within an hour, he'd drafted a cease and desist letter of his own this time, a real one, sent by certified mail. And then, as we dug deeper, James discovered something else. Something Connie never expected anyone to check. According to the county's HOA registry, Pinewood Estates hadn't filed renewal paperwork in over 3 years. Their legal charter had expired, meaning legally speaking the HOA didn't even exist anymore. Every letter, every fine, every rule Connie had enforced, all of it was built on nothing. A ghost organization. I couldn't believe it. She'd been running a defunct HOA like a personal fiefdom, banking on the fact that nobody would question it. That was the moment I knew exactly how to end this. Not with shouting, not with threats, but with the one thing she couldn't control: the truth. The next Saturday, I showed up to the community center early for the HOA meeting. The room smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet, the kind of place where people argue about mailboxes like it's life or death. Karen stood near the front with her usual posse, flipping through a stack of printed violation reports. When she spotted me, her smile froze like a statue. "Mr. Carter," she said, emphasizing the Mr. like it was an insult. "You're not on the agenda." I calmly pulled out my folder and handed it to her. "You're right, but the HOA Charter Review Committee is, and as its chairperson, I am." Her face went pale. Whispers rippled through the room like wind through dry leaves. I'd been waiting months for this. The original HOA charter, the one written before Karen even moved in, had a little-known clause stating that any major policy change required a 2/3 majority and approval from the Charter Committee, the same committee she'd conveniently ignored. I looked around the room and said, "You've all been told these new fines are mandatory, but according to the governing documents, they're not even valid." Karen tried to interject, waving her hands. "That's absurd. We voted last quarter." I cut her off with a copy of the meeting minutes. "Yes, but without committee approval, which makes them null and void." Silence. Then, for the first time in months, someone from the back, old Mr. Dwyer, the retired Navy man, stood up and said, "So, all those fines, they're fake?" I nodded. "Every single one." Karen's mouth opened, then closed again. Her power, built on fear, fines, and paperwork, began to crumble right there under the fluorescent lights. She turned to the board, desperate. "You can't let him do this. He's twisting the rules." I smiled slightly. "No, Karen. I wrote them." The room erupted, not in chaos, but applause. For once, the neighborhood had clarity. The meeting ended with a motion to suspend all pending fines until a full charter review was completed under my supervision. As I packed up my folder, I caught Karen glaring at me. Her expression wasn't rage anymore. It was fear, and I knew then this wasn't over. For about a week after that explosive meeting, things went eerily quiet. No more violation letters, no angry notes on mailboxes, no Karen standing in my driveway pretending to inspect the property. It was almost peaceful, but I knew her too well. Karen wasn't the kind of person who gave up. She was the kind who reloaded. It started small. A county inspector showed up at my door one morning, claiming there'd been an anonymous report about unsafe construction on my fence. The same fence the HOA had fined me for, of course. He walked around, checked a few things, and left with a shrug. "Everything looks fine here," he said. I just smiled because I already knew who'd made the call. Then came the social sabotage. Karen started whispering to neighbors that I'd forged the documents or hacked the HOA files. The rumor spread faster than wildfire in a dry summer. Some folks avoided eye contact at the grocery store. Others called me quietly, saying they didn't believe her but didn't want to get involved. That's when I realized Karen wasn't trying to win legally anymore. She was trying to win socially. Destroying my reputation was her new mission. So I decided to get ahead of her. I went door to door, just like she used to, but instead of threats or papers, I brought copies of the original HO, a charter signed and dated, with my name on the committee roster from over a decade ago. I explained everything calmly, showed them how the current board had been bending rules to fund their own beautification projects, which mostly meant repainting their own homes with HOA money. People listened. And more importantly, they believed me. By the end of the week, half the neighborhood had signed a petition demanding a recall election for the current HOA board. Karen's name was at the top of that list. When she saw the signatures being collected, she stormed over to my house, heels clacking like gunfire on the pavement. "You think you can turn everyone against me?" she shouted. I didn't raise my voice. "No, Karen. You did that yourself." She glared, trembling with rage, then hissed something under her breath about lawyers and defamation before storming off. I watched her car peel down the street, taillights disappearing into the dusk. That night, for the first time in months, I slept soundly, but I had a feeling deep down that this wasn't her last move. The recall meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in the Lakeside Estates clubhouse, the same place Karen had once stood, clipboard in hand, telling people their mailbox colors didn't meet community standards. Now, the room was packed wall to wall with homeowners, murmuring like a storm about to break. I sat in the back at first. I didn't want to be the center of attention. This was never about revenge, it was about fairness. But when the HOA attorney called for the floor to open, every eye turned toward me. Karen sat up front, wearing a pastel suit and a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She'd clearly spent hours rehearsing whatever speech she had planned. She even had a slideshow ready, her evidence that I was a disruptive, non-compliant homeowner. When she stood, her voice was sugar-sweet but trembling at the edges. "Neighbors," she began, "we've all seen what happens when people think they're above the rules. Mr. Thomas here." I raised a hand. "Point of order," I said calmly. "Before she continues, can we please review the official HOA charter?" The attorney blinked. "The original?" I nodded and handed over a sealed copy I'd kept safe for years. My wife, who used to be the HOA secretary before Karen's era, had notarized and preserved it. It showed in black and white that the board's powers had been altered without majority approval. In other words, most of Karen's fines, rules, and policies were invalid. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone shouted, "Wait, so those landscaping fees weren't even legal?" Another voice added, She made us pay for that new sign. Karen's face went pale. This is a misunderstanding, she blurted out. Those amendments were approved. But the attorney interrupted her. I'm not seeing signatures here, Mrs. Brooks. Not even from your own board members. You could have heard a pin drop. Then came the murmurs. Then the voices. Then the anger. People started standing up, waving copies of letters they'd received from her over the years, threats of fines, forced repaintings, and even property lines. Years of quiet resentment erupted all at once. Karen tried to regain control, banging on the podium. Order, O-R-D-E-R, she yelled, but no one was listening anymore. Finally, the attorney cleared his throat and said, "We're proceeding to a vote. All in favor of recalling the current board?" Nearly every hand in the room went up. Karen looked around, desperate, as if searching for a single friendly face, but there were none. Even her closest allies kept their eyes down. When the count was finished, the result was unanimous. The HOA board was dissolved effective immediately, pending a new election. Karen's jaw tightened. She gathered her papers with shaking hands and stormed out of the room, her heels echoing down the hallway like the last ticks of a dying clock. Outside, the late afternoon sun hit her face, and for the first time, she looked small. Not the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood anymore, but just another person who'd taken power too far and lost everything. As she drove away, one of the neighbors turned to me and said, "You didn't just win, Tom. You gave this neighborhood back its soul." I smiled faintly. I just reminded everyone who really owns it. And for the first time in a long while, Lakeside Estates felt like a community again, not a kingdom ruled by fear, but a place where people could breathe. Weeks passed, and for the first time in years, Lakeside Estates felt alive again. Lawns grew a little wilder, not neglected, but natural. Kids played in driveways without their parents, nervously looking over their shoulders for Karen's car. The mailbox bulletin board, once filled with threats and warnings, now held invitations for barbecues, yard sales, and neighborhood potlucks. The fear had drained out of the air. People laughed again. They waved. They talked. As for me, I spent my mornings on the porch with a cup of coffee, fixing things around the house that had been on hold for too long, not because I had to, but because I finally wanted to. The sound of hammers and saws around the neighborhood wasn't a nuisance anymore. It was a sign of life returning. Then one morning, as I was painting the front steps, I saw Karen's house. The blinds were gone, the for sale sign planted firmly in the yard. Rumor had it she'd moved to a condo in another county somewhere with stricter community standards. Fitting, really. But I didn't feel angry anymore. Just done. Some people need power, like they need air, and when they lose it, they suffocate themselves trying to grab it back. Karen had written her own ending long before I ever fought back. The new HOA board, smaller, friendlier, and elected fairly, asked me to serve as a consultant. I declined at first, but then my wife laughed and said maybe it's time you use those rules for something good. So I agreed. Just enough to help, not control. We rewrote the bylaws to make them simpler, kinder, and transparent. Every decision would require open discussion and a majority vote. No more secret committees. No more hidden agendas. And at the next community gathering, someone handed me a microphone. "Tom," they said, "you started this. Say a few words." I looked around at all the faces, old friends, new neighbors, even a few who'd once avoided me. "We learned something here," I said. "A neighborhood isn't about fences or lawn heights or mailbox colors. It's about people who care enough to live side by side and look out for each other. Rules are meant to protect us, not control us. The moment they start doing the opposite, it's up to us to take them back." The crowd clapped softly at first, then louder, until the room echoed with it. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the villain or the victim, just part of something good again. Later that night, as the sun dipped below the lake and the lights flickered on around the cul-de-sac, my wife came and sat beside me. "Feels peaceful again, doesn't it?" she said. I nodded. Yeah, finally. We sat there for a while, watching the reflection of the water ripple with the wind. And I thought about how chaos had a way of clearing things out, how sometimes you had to go through the storm to see who still stood beside you when it passed. Karen had built her kingdom on control. I'd rebuilt our home on trust. And as the neighborhood lights shimmered across the lake, I realized that was the real victory all along. E&D, would you like me to now compile all 9 sections into one complete cinematic narrative, cleaned, formatted, and polished for video voiceover flow? It had been almost 3 months since the recall meeting, long enough for the sting of conflict to fade, but not long enough to forget. Life in Lakeside Estates had settled into something that felt honest. People mowed their lawns when they felt like it. Fences didn't need to match, and the only committee anyone cared about was the one planning the next chili cook-off. One afternoon, I was sorting through the mail, mostly flyers, water bills, and the usual junk when I saw it, a plain white envelope, no return address, just my name written in tight, slanted handwriting. I knew that handwriting. I sat down on the porch, tore it open, and read. "Tom, I wanted to write before I left town for good. You probably won't believe me, but I never meant for things to go that far. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood. I thought people needed structure. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about community and started being about control. You were right to stand up to me. I just wish it hadn't come to that." Karen, there was no apology, not really. But there was something in those lines that sounded almost human. For the first time, I didn't hear the voice of the woman who fined people for mailbox colors or threatened retirees over garden gnomes. I heard someone who'd lost herself in the need to be obeyed. I folded the letter, slipped it back into the envelope, and set it in the drawer by the kitchen window. I didn't keep it as a trophy. I kept it as a reminder that control and community are 2 sides of the same coin, and it's easy to flip to the wrong one if no one's watching. A few days later, I saw a sold sign go up on Karen's old house. A young couple moved in, bright-eyed and full of plans. They stopped by one evening to introduce themselves. "We heard stories about the old HOA," the husband said with a nervous laugh. "You must have been through a lot." I smiled and shrugged. "Let's just say we learned how to build fences without building walls." The wife grinned. "We're glad we picked this place. It feels different here." And she was right. The air felt lighter. The neighborhood had grown out of its old skin. As the months rolled by, I planted a small oak tree near the edge of my property, the same spot where Karen once stood, clipboard in hand, lecturing me about my non-compliant fence. Every morning, I'd water it, watching as its roots began to take hold. Someday, it'll be tall enough to cast shade over the whole corner lot. Strong enough to weather storms, silent enough to remind anyone who walks by that sometimes, peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the lesson left behind when the noise finally stops. And maybe, somewhere out there, Karen learned that too. Because as I looked around the quiet, sunlit street, kids laughing, neighbors chatting, dogs running free, it hit me. We hadn't just taken back the HOA. We'd taken back what it meant to be neighbors. And that, I realized, was worth more than any victory could ever be. THEEND Final Epilogue. Would you like me to now merge all 10 sections into one continuous, cinematic, ready-to-narrate video script polished for pacing, tone, and emotional flow?